Bhutto of Pakistan, His Life and Times by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 16 Zulfi's Fall, From Martial Coup to Martyrdom, 5th July 1977 to 4th April 1979. Zulfi was driven in his black Mercedes with an escort convoy of armed soldiers fore and aft up to Murray's Best Hilltop military rest house on the morning of 5th July 1977. His Prime Minister's staff awaited him there with breakfast. He was greeted by all with appropriate respect and told that he was simply being held under protective custody. He had no illusions about the precariousness of his position. Nonetheless, he still believed he could intimidate Zia by reminding him of his oath to defend the Constitution and of the treasonous action he had taken in ordering the coup. He continued to underestimate the ambition of the man who had usurped his power, the intensity of Zia's hatred for him personally, and the contempt Zia felt for Zulfi's hedonistic lifestyle. For Zia always behaved with extreme humility whenever he spoke to or met with the man he had deposed. Although Zia would have found this transition much easier had one of Chishti's trusted officers opened fire on Zulfi before they reached Murray. Zia was a most patient man, certainly patient enough to wait for the death sentence that would now have to be carried out through the slower, more serpentine process of legal execution rather than swift, clean military method. Once having resolved to take the forceful action, he did this 5th day of July. Zia well knew that unless he lived to see Zulfikar Ali Bhutto dead, he himself would not live very long. Even a simple soldier or a simple Muslim, disciple of God, as he so often called himself, understood that much of Pakistan's iron rules of siyasat. General Ziaul Haq was no simple soldier but would prove to be Pakistan's most effective dictator politician. He would survive the top even longer than had Ayub, though his flaming fall would be both faster and fiercer. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. General Zia began his address to his great nation that afternoon in Urdu. You must have learnt by now that the government of Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto has ceased to exist and an interim government has been established in its place. I am grateful to God Almighty that the process has been accomplished smoothly and peacefully. All this action was executed on my orders. Chief Martial Law Administrator General Zia explained that the former Prime Minister and some of his colleagues, including Mumtaz Pirzada, Kausar Niazi, Rao Rashid, and Masood Mahmood, and most leaders of the Pakistan National Alliance, including Asghar Khan, Mufti Mahmood, and Ghafoor Ahmad, were all in protective custody. In earlier issuing his proclamation of martial law for the whole Pakistan, Zia had suspended the constitution, dissolved the National Assembly, and fired all federal ministers, ministers of state, advisors to the Prime Minister, and provincial governors and chief ministers. Yet now he told the nation that he wanted Pakistan to remain in the hands of the representatives of the people, who are its real masters. Because I genuinely feel that the survival of this country lies in democracy and democracy alone. Zia called it an inexcusable sin for the armed forces to sit as silent spectators while political leaders failed to reach agreement, and when I saw no prospects of a compromise, feared that the failure of the Pakistan National Alliance and Pakistan People's Party would throw the country into chaos. Then he wanted to make it absolutely clear that neither have I any political ambitions, nor does the army want to be distracted from its profession of soldiering. My sole aim is to organize free and fair elections which would be held in October this year. After the polls, power will be transferred to the elected representatives of the people. I give a solemn assurance that I will not deviate from this schedule. At 2 a.m., when Asghar Khan had been taken into custody by the troops who surrounded his house, the former air marshal had not been sure whether it was under orders from the Prime Minister or whether the army had staged a coup, but soon found himself inside Pindi's corps headquarters mess with Rao Rashid and Ghafoor Ahmad, Mufti Mahmud, Nasrullah, and Kausar Niazi. It was then that Asghar Khan rightly realized the possibility of an accord being reached between the government and the Pakistan National Alliance was not to his liking, and Ziaul Haq had decided to act without delay to obviate that risk. My dear countrymen, concluded Zia in his first of many addresses to the nation, I have expressed my real feelings and intentions without the slightest ambiguity. I have also taken you into confidence about my future plans. I seek guidance from God Almighty and help and cooperation from my countrymen to achieve this noble mission. I also hope that the judiciary will extend wholehearted cooperation to me. He would, of course, soon very much need the help of Pakistan's judiciary and was pleased to announce that the Chief Justices of all provincial high courts had, at my request, consented to become the acting governors of their provinces. He appealed, moreover, to the officers and men in the armed forces, in the true Islamic tradition, to forgive those who have ridiculed or harassed them in the past. Was it strange of him to appeal to his soldiers in such manner, or did that act, like his assurances regarding elections, reflect perhaps some darkly hidden deception, some fear and hatred he felt most deeply for the proud and powerful man he had taken prisoner, the man who had so often ridiculed and harassed him in the past year and a half? Asked by Edward Behr of Newsweek shortly after the coup how he felt about Bhutto, Zia replied, "He has been very kind to me, but I have no regrets. I have no personal venom against him." Was it not odd for one man to use the word venom about his feelings towards another? Questioned whether he thought Bhutto would go ahead and campaign in the autumn after what had happened to him, Zia responded, "He should. He is a very determined man with a great sense of history. He is also a very tenacious fighter and a great politician. How would Zia feel about returning to normal soldiering after running the country? I am a soldier and I will go back to the soldiering." Then Behr reminded him, "That's what the late President Ayub Khan said, and he then held onto power for 11 years. Zia invited Behr to call me after the elections to confirm that I mean it. Zia promised that political parties will be given all the facilities to shout their heads off, and we will only impose minor restrictions like a possible ban on processions. It would be a clean campaign with the armed forces present only to ensure impartiality." Zia flew up to Murree with Chishti on 12th July, and both generals met with Bhutto alone in his rest house. General Zia said that he was only a temporary custodian, Chishti recalled, and that it was going to be all Mr. Bhutto's again and he should manage it as he deemed fit. Mr. Bhutto asked how long he would be in custody, to which General Zia said for some days only, during which he should rest and recoup. Mustafa Khar had initially been difficult to find, Chishti noted. Soon after martial law had been declared, however, Khar wired Zia, requesting an audience. Zia was too busy but passed the message along to his corps commander, who met with Khar at the officers' mess in Pindi's Chaklala military airport. He told me that he was a worried man and completely upset because his wife was expecting a baby, Chishti wrote, who refused to permit Khar to leave the mess, placing him under custody there, but permitting him to phone his wife and stay the night in the mess before going up to Murree the next morning. Intelligence reported that as soon as Khar arrived at the hill station rest house, Zulfi accused him of being disloyal. He asked Mustafa to look into his eyes, upon which Zulfi snapped that he could see disloyalty and mischief in the dark eyes of the Lion of Punjab. Khar has been the most treacherous and the most ungrateful of them all, Zulfi later wrote from his death cell. Mumtaz Khar and Pirzada would all be driven over daily in an army Suzuki van from their barracks quarters to visit Zulfi in his private rest house at Murree as the sun started to set. Khar's pregnant wife, Tahmina, who stayed close to him in Murree, reported that they would sit and discuss past foibles, current affairs, and future policies. Mr. Bhutto was furious at what Zia had done. His arrogance never left him. He was convinced that the generals were on a sticky wicket. There was no other reason for the VIP treatment he was receiving at their hands. Mr. Bhutto held court, still displaying prime ministerial airs. He was indiscreet. He would openly abuse the generals and accuse them of treason. He swore revenge and vowed to take them to task when he returned to power. His men felt that Mr. Bhutto was being reckless. The house was obviously bugged. Zia held his first press conference on 14th July and again vowed that my intention has all along been to lay a tradition that the army will not meddle in politics. Let the politicians decide things by themselves. We are determined to do our constitutional duty and perform our constitutional obligation, namely the support of the government. Unfortunately, as we have seen the law and order situation deteriorated, it is the job of the army, in fact, its national duty to act if somebody is looting or destroying public property or is trying to disrupt the pattern of normal life. All of us stressed upon the government in the name of God to solve the problem politically. Zia insisted that. We have treated the former Prime Minister and his colleagues, as well as the opposition members, with grace. We are providing them a comfortable stay. They need to do a lot of thinking for the future because the destiny of the country is in their hands. They have got to look after the future of this country, not I. I am there only for 90 days. I am a very humble man. To say that there is collusion between me and the former Prime Minister is ridiculous. Can a man of his caliber share power with me? Other people say, no, he is not a Bhutto protege, but a Pakistan National Alliance man because he went to say his prayers, because he is talking about Islam. You can draw your own conclusions. Incidentally, maybe I am wrong, but none of the political parties has Islam as number one item on their manifestos. Nizam-e-Mustafa and Nizam-e-Islam came up during their political activity. It was, in my opinion, forced by the people of Pakistan on political leaders. I say, Islam has to be the cornerstone of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. I am Muslim by faith, by birth, and by actions. In some respects, Zia proved to be a much shrewder politician for Pakistan than Zulfi Bhutto had ever been. His humble political image and style was at the opposite end of the political spectrum from Zia's flamboyance. His top priorities, the army and Islam, were in many ways more important to most Pakistanis than roti kapda or makan, for all those who joined the army were assured of bread, clothing and housing, and those who did not could always pray to God for them. Well-to-do Pakistanis in large cities, moreover, by now considered law and order, if not their highest priority, certainly essential to daily existence. They were sick of violence and most of them were tired of political promises, usually forgotten the day after polling ended. Here at last was a simple soldier, a devout and modest man who wanted only to keep the country calm and secure, to restore Islamic values of pride, dignity and decency to its troubled and all too turbulent populace. Why then for only 90 days? Why turn the country back after so brief an interval to the greedy, arrogant, squabbling, inept politicians? We have no intention of any witch hunting, Zia promised in the mid July press conference. It is up to the next lot of elected representatives of the people, or the people themselves, to take action against the politicians. The courts are still functioning, and we have not stopped anyone from going to the courts to take the politicians to task. Then why do they want me or the military or the armed forces to hang a few politicians? Why should I? Isn't it as much a concern of the public as it is mine? It should be done by them, if it is to be done. Foremost among those few politicians that they wanted him to hang, of course, was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. But part of Zia's political appeal was that he not only maintained an aura of humble simplicity, which almost made the world forget what dictatorial powers he had usurped in direct violation of Article 6 of the Constitution he had sworn to protect and defend, but also sought to project himself as a non vindictive, if not non violent man. Let the hanging be done by the courts and the public, if it is to be done. He now softly suggested, even more gently adding, but I would dissuade them from this. What we want at the moment is a calm, peaceful, and congenial atmosphere for holding elections. After the new legislature has come and whosoever forms them government, let them do it. That was fair, was it not, to let them do the hanging? Hanging was much on the mind of General Ziaul Haq because his Murshid had failed to make a clean and swift job of it. Now it would have to be done slowly by that most cumbersome of processes, taking the bastard, as Zia by now thought of and later called Zulfi Bhutto, to court, unless he could be more expeditiously hanged by a military court under martial law. That might raise shouts of injustice the world over, however, and could potentially backfire. A prudent general had to cover both flanks and his rear as well as his front. After the new legislature had come, and whosoever forms the government, let them do it, Zia offered, showing many teeth when he smiled. And as representatives of the people, it is up to you to see that they do take some action. But so far as the pre-election period is concerned, why should we create difficulties for one person or one party and not the other? Of course, they must take some actions. Why should we worry now about one person or one party? Zia's singular political power was derived not only from the tanks and guns he commanded, formidable though those were, but from his pretense of always remaining above the fray of partisan political haggling and scuffling. He represented the national ethos even as the army defended and protected it. Our acts and deeds will demonstrate whether we are usurpers or traitors and whether we violated the Constitution or not. General Zia concluded. Once, by the grace of God, the elections are held and the new legislature comes into being, they may consider all that our aim is straightforward. We want to hold free, fair, and just elections in October. The date I have intentionally not given because there may be some adjustments to be made. Free and fair elections would, in fact, be held again in November, not October, 11 years later. Some 2 months after General Ziaul Haq's C-130 went down over Bahawalpur, with him and all those inside swiftly consumed by the flames of its exploding gas tanks. That day, as Zia spoke to the press in Pindi, Zulfi penned 2 top-secret and most confidential letters in Murree, one to the Soviet ambassador and one to the Chinese ambassador, both of which were hand-delivered by his servant to the embassies in Islamabad. I have come to know that the coup leaders told the Chinese ambassador that one of the reasons for the coup was because I was going to move towards the Soviet Union. Zulfi wrote Asimov. Soviet leaders should also know that I had informed the relevant authorities of my decision to leave Cento when the National Assembly was reconvened on 9th of July. The coup took place 4 days earlier. As for the accord, it was going to be signed within 2 days at the most. To the Chinese ambassador, he wrote much the same letter, but also wanted to make it abundantly clear that in my foreign policy, the People's Republic of China occupied a central position. No power on earth can shake or injure our relationship. It is of mutual interest and vital to the whole region. As far as Cento is concerned, I told your leaders last year, and I have said this repeatedly, that my decision to leave Cento and to join the mainstream of non alignment is based solely on national considerations, uninfluenced by the policy of any other country. Pak China friendship is taller than the Karakoram and deeper than the oceans. Zia went up to Murree again on 15th July and met with Mufti Mahmud, Nasarullah Khan, and Ghafoor Ahmad for more than an hour before seeing Asghar Khan. He informed those PNA leaders that the army had intelligence of a Pakistan People's Party armed procession planned to be held in Lahore on 5th July, which was why the army took action it did that morning to save the country from civil war. Then he went off to meet Bhutto alone, but did not, of course, tell him that story. Zulfi, however, gave Zia a piece of his mind, chastising him, reminding him that the constitution called for the death penalty for any officer who abrogated it or tried to topple his government by force. It was hardly the sort of chat designed to endear him to Zia's heart, though it shows how little Zulfi suspected as yet of what his fate would be, and how fearless, some would say foolhardy, he was. His personal staff was removed the next day, which may have chastened him a bit. But Zulfi never quite imagined throughout most of that stormy July he spent in Murree's hilltop rest house that his days of prime power and glory were over, and even those of a far more wretched, ignominious existence were by now numbered. Former Federal Security Force Director Masood Mahmood was also kept in relatively comfortable isolated detention from the 5th of July, given plenty of paper and told to write everything he remembered about any illegal things the former Prime Minister had ordered him to do, including arranging the ambush murder of Raza Ahmad Kasuri's father. For Masood, the alternative to preparing those briefs that would help hang his former chief, the approver testimony to his fatal orders, was his own hanging. Zia's men had made that very clear from the first dark night they brought him in. And Masood knew Zia much better, after all, than Zulfi Bhutto did, for Masood and Zia were both men well trained in every martial art. Like Zia, Masood was a devout Muslim, a humble man who also had reason to hate and condemn Zulfi's arrogant, insulting ways of dealing with him and his crude vulgarity in dealing with most women, including PIA's stewardesses and the young wives of many of his colleagues. Masood Mahmood knew, moreover, where all the bodies were buried, when and why prisoners had been sent to Dhulai camp in Azad Kashmir or had been incarcerated in the black hole of Lahore's old fort or otherwise disposed of. So Masood had a very busy month, digging deeper each day into the mountain of dirt would soon bury his old boss. The worst lecher he had ever met in his life, he asserted. When Zulfi had lost faith in old friends, he had ordered Masood to take care of them. which to Masood's mind was a clear message to remove them. Jam Sadiq Ali is a mouse, Zulfi had once told him. Masood recalled. Can't you find a cat to take care of him? Masood immediately informed his friend Jam Sadiq Ali, who flew from Karachi to London the next day. Afzal Saeed Khan, public secretary to the Prime Minister, had also been arrested. He too was given paper enough to help hang the man he had long intimately served in the most delicate money matters, disbursing large sums kept in secret funds for the Prime Minister's discretionary use, most of which were used for election work. Other larger amounts donated by Sheikh Zayed and placed in trusts for the Prime Minister and Begum Nusrat to manage were also used for the party. 60-year-old Afzal Saeed, who described himself as honest and straightforward as well as deeply religious, explained how hard a taskmaster the former Prime Minister had been, tolerating no delay in his secretary's work, never sparing him even for a minor lapse. It was not surprising that he too was quite ready and willing to serve as an approver in the criminal cases of peculation as well as murder that were being hammered together all the rest of that ram-filled summer to erect at least one scaffold high enough for Zulfi Bhutto. Even Mustafa Khar was flown on 24th July from his rest house in Murree to Lahore's stately old neo-Gothic courthouse. There, to give his deposition, much was known of the many differences he had had with his old friend, ever since Zulfi first appointed him Governor of Punjab. Then their fights had increased after Khar was made Chief Minister until those differences became intolerable, as Khar explained it in the High Court. It was true that when somebody showed political differences with Mr. Bhutto, he used to be jailed and based on his personal likes and dislikes, revengeful actions used to be taken against political opponents. But sometimes he also showed tolerance. Small wonder that Zulfi later thought of Khar as my Brutus. Yet, Khar preferred not to remain in Pakistan and stand up to say what he knew, for he knew many things about Zulfi that were known indeed by no one other than him of that soon to be much accused man, but chose instead to accept Chishti and Zia's offer a few months later to fly to London with his sixth wife and their new daughter. We could not tell a soul about our flight into exile, his now former wife recalled. Was it shame or fear that kept Mustafa so darkly cloaked and silent after having said so much as he did in his Lahore deposition? At least he would never have to look again into the eyes of his soon-to-be executed political mentor. I declare once again that elections shall, inshallah, be held in October, General Zia assured the nation on 27th July 1977. The world shall witness this great nation electing its representatives in free and fair elections, which will lead to the establishment of a national government to which the armed forces of Pakistan shall hand over power that they now hold in trust. The representatives that emerge from these elections should be such as are imbued with the spirit of service to Pakistan, men who are not governed by greed or avarice, who do not fight the elections to satisfy their lust for power. Insofar as my personal view about the restoration of democracy is concerned, I believe that democracy has not been given a chance to flourish in this country during the last 30 years. True, there has been much talk of democracy, but no positive measures were taken to help it take root. Despite this, I firmly believe that the tender plant of democracy shall not only take root in our country, but would eventually become a full tree. He then urged voters to cast their ballots for only one who is a true Pakistani and a Momin, devout Muslim. Zia's earlier apolitical posture had clearly by now been abandoned, and in warning his countrymen not to re elect anyone motivated by greed or avarice or lust for power, he obviously meant Zulfi Bhutto or his party. Not that anyone would have another chance to do so, despite Zia's belief in democracy, at least not while Zia was alive. That plant would remain much too tender to take root in Pakistan's tough military governed soil for the next decade and a bit longer. But now that peace and tranquility had been restored to Pakistan by the armed forces with the help of God Almighty, Zia was pleased to report that within a day or two he would release all political leaders from protective custody. But from August 1st till the end of Ramadan, only limited political activity would be permitted. No political meetings, processions, or political activities in the streets. He wanted everyone to keep calm, and his earlier martial law ban on the publication of political statements or newspapers would remain in force.